pick and choose the stories that you make your own. And it's okay to do that, right? It's okay to say no gracias when you're writing your own story. No gracias to the stories that kind of hold you back.
Welcome to LatinX Can, a podcast showcasing Latinx professionals who turn their dreams into realities. I'm your host, La Doctora Jenire Flores Delgado, and today I'm here with Dr. Victoria Mora, President of the United World College USA, one of 18 schools in a global movement that makes education a force for peace and a sustainable future. And she is here to tell you, sí se puede, my friends, sí se puede. Dr. Victoria Mora, welcome to LatinX Can.
Thank you so much, Jenire. I'm really happy to be here.
And I'm so excited to have you. I think UWC is definitely one of the things that changed my life completely. And so I can't wait to learn more about your story, but also help other people learn about this amazing movement.
That sounds fantastic.
So let's start by talking a little bit about your story and where your story begins.
Okay, I'd love to. So I think the older I get, the more I realize, and this sounds silly, but the more I realize how much one's story really starts with one's parents. And my story, I think, starts with negotiations with my mother to avoid napping, which turned me into a really avid reader, and then with time, a really avid learner. And then it starts too with my father's introduction to so many different kinds of people into our lives, you know, people who gave me all kinds of role models and mentors. I have 5 siblings, and the 6 of us grew up in a small 2-bedroom house. My mom, Crucita, desperately needed naps. And so we were all expected to take naps. I figured that out much later, that the naps were really not for the children, they were for her. But I couldn't sleep during the day. I never could. And so after 3 years of really trying with me every which way, my poor mother gave up and struck a bargain. And the bargain was, if I could sit quietly and look at books at age 4, then, you know, she would let me just sit quietly. And so that's what I did. And I just ended up loving, you know, like all the library books that we would bring home and being able to look at those. And that was really the beginning of my love affair with reading.
Yeah.
My dad, Roberto, trained as a fireman, and he was burned really badly in a fire truck accident and ended up as a fire inspector at Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he used to joke that it only took 3rd-degree burns for someone with an 8th grade education to end up in a white-collar job. My dad was really funny. And you know, he would invite people from the base, all kinds of people over for dance parties. That was a big thing for our family. And so people would come, and they were from all over the world, different cultures, you know, different races. And that's where I really got my love of just being around people and learning as much as possible from people who are different.
I think about what your mom made you guys nap so that she can have some time. And it reminds me of me growing up. My dad would be the one who would always, to this day, he still takes naps. And he calls it the secret to eternal youth.
Oh, I love that.
Because he's super active. He's 78. He plays tennis every day. But he says his secret is just taking naps every day.
Oh, that's great. My mama's 85 and she still takes her naps, and she's about as youthful as they come.
Yeah, maybe we just need to keep doing that, you know, incorporate into our lives.
I still don't know how to nap during the day.
And so, Victoria, one thing that it comes from your story, right? Like your mom initiated that habit for reading, and that sort of sparkled your desire to learn more, to just continue educating yourself and just really go through an education journey for many years, right? Because you got your bachelor's degree from the University of New Mexico in philosophy and English. And then you went on to Yale University to get a master's degree, and then eventually eventually a PhD degree in philosophy. So this was back in the days, right? So this was early 90s when you finished your PhD. And we now talk about Latinas getting PhDs, and we're few, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard going through it. It's a hard process. And we've made some progress in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Mm-hmm. So I wonder if it's hard now, how was that experience in the 90s for you?
That's a great question, Jennifer. And it's funny because I wonder if it wasn't easier for me somehow in this sense. First, I didn't feel any pressure because the path was wholly my own. Like there wasn't that talk about first gen and the difficulties attached. It didn't enter my consciousness. You know, 4 of my 5 siblings graduated from high school, and that already felt like a quantum leap for our family, given that neither of my parents had graduated from high school. And one of my sisters graduated early from high school and then went on and did an associate's degree. So when I got interested in a 4-year college, it was completely out of the box. And I didn't feel any pressure to do it any particular way. Add to that my parents were incredibly supportive. I mean, I don't care if I was, dragging them to speech and debate tournaments on Saturdays and Friday nights, or if I was hauling a dead cat onto the dinner table after the dishes were cleared because I was in the thick of dissecting it. They were totally on board and they totally trusted me. When I said I was studying late at night on Friday nights and Saturday nights at the library, I really was, and they allowed me to do it. Yeah. So they just really supported the journey. And I was blissfully ignorant, right? Like I studied the things that interested me, and I trusted people who urged me, on. I took all kinds of unsolicited advice because I didn't really know what questions to ask. And I usually just laughed off obnoxious comments that should have discouraged me. And so I was really lucky to be blissfully ignorant and to have all of the support in the world, but none of the pressure.
Yeah, I think I can relate a little bit because I didn't grow up in the US. So I grew up in Venezuela and I just was represented my entire life. I was just one more of everybody else. And then when I went to UWC, yes, I was the only one, maybe 2 Latinas in the entire school, of close to 500 people.
Wow.
But there were other people that were the only person representing their school.
Yes.
And we were all very different from each other. So I never felt like I was the only one who was different. And so when I went on to get my PhD, for example, when I saw other Latinas, but there weren't many, but it was normal because at UWC, I didn't have many people. So I thought the world was supposed to just be like that, and we were just always supported by our peers and by our professors. And so I sort of built this, I don't know, way of going around my life where I was the only one, but that's okay. Everybody else was the same. But then I remember this one time, and it's a very vivid example. They told me, we're going to have a conference for women in science and engineering. And I was like, we need a conference just for women? Why? And so they start talking about it and they say, well, there's always very few women in technical fields. And when they show up, people think that they're the administrator or they're just there to take notes. And I was like, what? How is this possible? And so I was just ignorant throughout the entire time. And then when things happened and I started realizing these obnoxious things that happened, I was like, wait a minute, what's going on?
Yes, no, that makes total sense to me. And it's so funny. I mean, I think for each one of us, we have to go through our own awakening, right? I mean, I remember I was asked to be on a panel in the philosophy department at my undergraduate school, University of New Mexico. And I remember someone in the audience, we were talking about Anglo-American philosophy, and somebody in the audience asked me what it was like for me as a Chicana to study Anglo-American philosophy. And I was like, I didn't quite understand the question. And so I started by talking just about, American pragmatism really shows itself in these various ways. And, education has been highly influenced by these thinkers. And I started down that path. And the woman said, no, but for you, is it like, do you feel like you're betraying your roots? And I was like, I was totally confused. And then I realized, oh, the emphasis was on, as a Chicana, what is it like? And, for me, since I was a little girl, I just got to pursue the questions and the topics that were interesting to me. And it never occurred to me that something wasn't meant for me. And so that ignorance is a kind of bliss. And then the moment of awakening that you're describing is one of those moments where you have to ask yourself, am I going to let this trip me up? Or am I going to say, okay, awakening received, and I'm going to keep going, assuming I belong at this table no matter what?
Yeah, I agree. You choose what to do with that information, right? Yeah. It's not like at the moment of awakening, those things weren't happening. They were happening no matter what, but it's just we weren't aware of them. So we didn't let those things stop us. And then at that point, when you encounter it and when you become aware, I think becoming aware is very important because then it helps us make it easier for the generation that comes after us. But we have to choose what to do with that information, and we can't let it be something that holds us back.
That's exactly right. I still remember one of those first moments of awakening when I was in a junior high school English class, and it was, the school didn't have like honors, and I guess it didn't even have AP at that time. What it had was enriched English. So I was in the highest level English class I could be in at my high school. And we were reading The Scarlet Letter, Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. And the teacher, was presenting, and I raised my hand and asked a question about what she'd said. And she answered my question. And then I raised my hand again and asked a second question. And she looked a little bit irritated, but she answered it. And then I raised my hand a third time to ask a second follow-up question. And she looks at me and she says, you people don't need to worry about it at that level of depth. And I looked around and I was one, even though it was a predominantly Chicano school, I was one of the only Chicana kids in the classroom. And I said, what do you mean, you people, students of advanced English? I got hauled into the principal's office for being a smart aleck, right? But it was really one of those moments where I wasn't being a smart aleck. I was like completely confused. Who are you people? And then, it took years to reflect back. And it was like, I'm so glad that I didn't let that discourage me. I'm glad that there was something inside me that found it funny in the sense that there was not something wrong with me. There was something wrong with what she was saying.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying, it takes years when you think back to that situation and you're like, oh, this is what's happening. This is what was happening at that time. Oh my gosh, I can't believe it. Yeah. So we had this situation like with one of my friends early on. Like I went to the University of Florida and I went to UF as a choice because I was one of the very few Latinas at UWC in Eswatini. I felt like I needed that Latino influence. So I said, well, we're going to be in Florida and there's a lot of Latinos out there. So I feel like I'm going to have, I think, the best of both worlds. And so that was a very intentional choice. But then when I went to grad school, I forgot, like I had a really good time at UF and I thought the life was just going to be like that everywhere. And then I went to Texas A&M, which it was totally, completely different. I had to find, again, the few Latinos that were out there so that I could bring them into my circle of friends. And one time I remember I found these Latinos and we were at one of the apartment complexes and we went out to, it was maybe 9 p.m. and we bought some drinks and then we went to the swimming pool at one of the apartment complexes. But we weren't swimming. We were just sitting there having drinks and just having fun. The one thing that we had done wrong, I guess, is that we had glass.
Okay.
In the, at the pool area, which was against the rules. But all of a sudden we were just sitting there and this guy, I don't know, maybe 40s and 50s, he was white and he came in in the pool, and he started yelling at us, and they're like, who are you guys over here? Like, you cannot be doing this. And he took all of our drinks and he threw them in the trash. And I was like, wait, what's going on? And we were all international students at the time as well. And so we were like very afraid of doing anything wrong because we always believed that we could get deported and things could go south very fast. And so none of us did really argue with this guy. And then he's like, oh, I'm going to call the police on you because like you guys are trespassing. Nobody lives here. Like we hadn't heard when he asked first who lives here. And then we heard it. And then the guy who lived there, and he's like, oh, I live here. Wait a minute. Like, I actually live here. So, like, he made this whole fuss, and he threw our drinks away. And we were like, what the heck? And so we just picked up our things, and we went to the apartment. And we just lived through it. You know, and it wasn't like until 2 years ago that I was like, oh, wait a minute, like that guy was being totally racist against us just because we were hanging out there. And I'm so bitter still. I wish that I could go back in time and I could address it at the time, but I just didn't have the tools, not even the awareness to do it.
Oh, that's so painful. And it's true. You do look back and sometimes, though, you just have to let it go and remember that the next time it happens, you know, you're everybody's teacher. And that's the thing I think I've continued to believe. Even if someone is acting in that way and, you know, it's willful and it's intentional, I assume they might actually be educable. And whether it's, you know, making light of it, but in a very pointed way, or addressing it head on. And doing so in a peaceful and thoughtful way, I did get to the point in my own awareness of saying, I'm not just letting that go anymore. I'm going to assume everybody is educable. And that's what I do now.
Yeah. But I think it takes a lot of maturity, though, to get there.
It does take time to get there. That's for sure.
Yeah. So in your story, you mentioned like your siblings graduating from high school was already a huge achievement for your family.
Yes.
And then you went on and you became the first doctor in your family, doctor of philosophy. And nowadays it's very common that we talk about the achievements of first generation people because we talk about their stories and their stories are inspirational and they help other people be represented. But the narrative can make it seem like we got there alone. And in reality, and in particular for Latinx families, it takes a village, right? You don't get there alone. And you've shared with me that this narrative makes you slightly uncomfortable sometimes. So can you talk a little bit more about how it makes you feel? And maybe if you have any suggestions as how we can acknowledge the achievements of people who are just breaking out barriers out there without minimizing the experiences of other people that pursued other paths?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. And you're absolutely right. You know, the stories that are about those who come before us, they can be really inspiring. But honestly, they can also be constricting and limit us. So, you know, maybe the most important observation I can make is this. Pick and choose among the narratives, right? Pick and choose the stories that you make your own. And it's okay to do that, right? It's okay to say no gracias when you're writing your own story. No gracias to the stories that kind of hold you back. I'll use an example from my family. My family's always been so supportive and so proud of my accomplishments. And the family has had a kind of interesting narrative about educated people that's not so positive. And the way that really came home to me was when I was in graduate school at Yale. And on my breaks from school, my mother would ask me to come to the Air Force Base where she was a custodian. And sometimes I'd help her or just show up for lunch to eat lunch with her. And she'd always make sure to introduce me to everybody who came into the rec center that she cared for. And she would start by saying, this is Victoria. She's my fourth. She's the educated one that I told you about. Pero es muy buena gente. And every time she said that, I would just kind of laugh because, I mean, she may as well have said pero with a capital P, right? Like as if you can't both be educated, pero, buena gente. And, I could see that she somehow needed to offer a defense or an apology for my education, even while she was bragging about it. And that was an implicit narrative that you can't be both, right? You can't be buena gente and educated. And it's something that I internalized. And I've always been simultaneously proud and uncomfortable when I'm introduced by my family as the educated one. Because I know, education isn't just about book learning. I mentioned that all but one of my siblings graduated high school, and the one who didn't is, one of my wisest siblings. She went to the school of hard knocks in many, many ways. And yet she was the one who was caring for nieces and nephews, including my children, and passed on so much wisdom, including a wisdom that comes from a deep faith, right? That isn't about book knowledge, even though she's an avid reader herself. So going to college, it was incredible for me. It had a huge impact on my life, on the life of my family, our children. But there are other ways to acquire an education, and I never forget that. And that's part of the story I think I always want to remind myself of and share with my children and grandchildren. And it's just super important.
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot because having gone through that type of educational journey gives you a lot of privileges. I see my friends from Venezuela, for example, neither of them were born here. They didn't study here, and they came here to do their PhDs forced by the political situation in Venezuela. And we get PhDs, we graduate, and we don't have any student debt. And so when we get through that and then start working in white collar jobs that pay really well, we have this immense privilege of people that were born in this country and have tried to get an education, and to get an education, they get into immense debt, right? And so it's that balance in like, we get this privilege to live a comfortable life, but that doesn't mean that we're better than anybody else, right? Exactly. And I think for my family, at least, they instill those values in us. It's like, you may be the CEO, but like, you're not better than the person that is next to you giving you coffee every morning, for example. And you need to acknowledge that.
That's right.
And you need to make sure that you value people for who they are.
No, that's exactly right. And if we had a little more of that attitude, I think people would find much greater joy in the jobs they do. And we benefit, frankly, from it. I mean, I remember once watching a friend of mine, colleague at the time, an African-American woman, a highly educated, best sorority, something I teased her about because I'm so not a sorority girl, right? And I noticed that every time we ate out, she asked what the name of the server was. And it's a lesson I really appreciate. And I do it every time now. And I don't care how fancy the restaurant is or not. I don't care if I'm with somebody, maybe it's somebody, a donor or anybody else. I will always ask and use that person's name throughout. It is such a small way to acknowledge another human being who's like making your life better. And offering up a gift of service in the same way that I'm trying to offer up a gift of service in my job. And I love that. And I similarly, another girlfriend, Japanese American, a lawyer who I noticed, gave really generous tips at every stage of an interaction, whether it's somebody opening the door or a driver and I realized, I can do that because I've got the privilege of earning more than I ever thought I would earn. And how nice to be able to do that. I remember what that meant when I was waitressing. I mean, it meant a lot. And so those are small ways to remind yourself where you come from and how important it is to recognize everybody who makes that possible in all kinds of ways.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And one of the things that we have in common is our involvement with the United World Colleges. UWC is a global movement that makes education a force to unite peoples, nations, and cultures for peace and a sustainable future. And you are the president of UWC-USA, which is the only school of the UWC network that is located in the United States and is one of 18 schools around the world. Mm-hmm. And I would like to know from your perspective as an educator, what is UWC all about and how is the UWC education different from a traditional high school education in the US?
Now, I think you can answer that question better than I can as a student, as a graduate of UWC, then Swaziland, now Eswatini. I guess from my perspective, and my perspective comes from two places. One, I am the president of UWC-USA, but I'm also the mother of an alum. And I would say that UWC in some very basic way is about bringing together young people who think they want to change the world and then giving them a healthy dose of the world with all of its diversity, all of its complexities as part of their educational experience. And in that sense, I think UWC is a kind of ultimate test of a student's openness to learning and to growth. They're constantly challenged. They're challenged to leave their comfort zone, whether they're engaged in a history class, right, with 15 different perspectives on the same historical event, or whether they're in a dorm discussion about community standards and community agreements when they have like totally different cultural experiences, totally different experiences, from, 40 different countries, right? So unlike most high schools, students at UWC are forced to encounter everything they thought they knew or are coming to know through multiple perspectives. And everything they take for granted is up for debate. I think that's really what makes a UWC different from other high schools. You're not only encountering others, you're encountering what's other in yourself. And you're doing that all the time from multiple perspectives. And I think it's not just the students who go through that. I know I have had to really learn and grow as I've led this school. And that is, a wonderful blessing. And frankly, it can be really frustrating. And if at my age, I get frustrated when I'm being questioned, I can imagine what that's like on a daily basis for students. Does that resonate at all with your experience?
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, when I went to UWC, it was completely life-changing because up until the moment when I went to UWC, I was like top of the class at home every time. And on top of that, I did diving and gymnastics and I was very good at it. I was a national champion for both. And so the world moved around me. It surrounded me. Like I was the center of my world, right? Like everybody moved for me. And so when I went to UWC, everything changed because one, I couldn't practice diving anymore. And on top of that, I wasn't the top of the class anymore. Everybody else was more versed in English than me to begin with, and everybody else seemed more intelligent than me at the same time. And I was like so completely thrown out of any foundation I had. And so every day just became an experience where we were just learning about life on top of trying to learn about chemistry and math and things like that. So eventually the sort of the academic part, I got down because I had my habits, right? Like that was the easy thing to control. But I do remember learning from people from different countries and learning, for example, in my education in Venezuela, I don't remember really learning so much about, say, the details of World War II and the genocide, for example. Like we just sort of sprinted through those things. And then we have Jews and Germans discussing something like that. Yeah. And I'm just like sitting back and I'm like just listening and trying to then understand how the purpose of this school is for us to be able to have those kind of conversations, for people who are Jewish and German to be able to sit at the table and to say, this is what happened, this is how it affected our families, and how can we better understand each other so this doesn't happen again, right?
No, exactly. And then add to that, every kind of element of generational trauma and pain and things that different peoples have gone through. And, we all get caught up in our own and don't necessarily realize what others have been through. And you're doing that at every level of the school. And so that's what I mean when I say, like, on the one hand, we're encountering so many others, right, at a UWC, but we're also recognizing ourselves as other, right? Like, what must that be like for that German student to hear that Jewish student talk? Or in my own case, even I said it gives me, puts me in uncomfortable situations. I was having a conversation with the Black Caucus on campus, and something had happened on campus that was really ugly. A word had appeared on a whiteboard. And it created quite a serious discussion on campus, and the people who wrote it didn't come forward. It was the N-word. And the Black students formed a caucus, and we all got together to talk about it. And at one point in our conversation, and this is just a conversation with me and the students at my home, the Black Caucus, and one of the students said to me, Victoria, we appreciate that you're really supporting us, but you don't know what it's like to have Black skin and what that's like all the time, and to be expected to rise above things, right? And I said, you're right. I don't have that experience, but I do have the experience of having brown skin and often being in spaces where that is unusual. And then I shared some experiences that they actually recognize. And those are the moments where, like, being vulnerable with each other is also a way of supporting each other and saying, it's not necessarily going to get better, but it will get easier as you take ownership of how you respond in situations that are fundamentally unjust. And I think that's one of the things also that you learn at UWC. You really develop a kind of character to be able to face adversity and to be resilient. And I think that's another big piece of it that I see here in a way that I don't see at other places.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying is that most of the UWC schools, people live together. It's a boarding school. And so those people become your family. I mean, I have a group of friends who are my very, very close friends. And I do remember the last day of school for my second year, I was devastated. I was so sad because everybody was leaving and I was leaving, and I never knew when I was going to see them again. But I had a teacher, and he told me, Jenny, the people that matter, you will see again. You will see them again in your life. And we've seen them. Like, I've seen them many times since we graduated a long time ago now. And it's that kind of interaction that really allows you to be vulnerable with the people that are with you in the classroom and in your shared room as well.
And there is something so special about particularly those 2 years. And I know there are UWCs that have longer programs, but those 2 DP years for the IB, and at that age between 16 and 18, 19, it's so powerful in terms of the growth, right? And that was part of the vision of the founder of UWC, Kurt Hahn, who really recognized that if you bring kids together at that particular almost magical age, before their prejudices have had a chance to really gel, but when their powers of reason are really coming into their own, that's the point at which you can really affect, the hearts and minds of young people and maybe break past kind of the ugliness of war or the Cold War during which it was founded. So what you're describing just resonates with me so much, and you see it happen again and again every year. And it's like, for me, it's like this beautiful, almost sacred opportunity to witness what's possible when people come together in the way that they do here.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, Victoria, the movement, like you just mentioned, it was established towards the end of the 1960s at the height of the Cold War. And it was a time when we thought that if we could understand each other a little better, we could prevent future conflicts around the world. And since then, every 21st of September, we get together to commemorate UWC Day. And this year's UWC Day theme is Peace Begins with Us. And it's a theme that actually seems very fitting for the times that we're living. We have so much misunderstanding and we have a lot of, especially in the States right now, so much fear of the other. I think it's the best way that I can put it. And I can understand, having gone through UWC, how peace begins with me. But I'm curious, from your perspective as a person that is seeking to instill those values in people, what does it mean to believe that peace begins with us? And how does UWC manage to instill those values?
Yeah, one of my favorite things to reflect on with our students and staff is what all of us from different backgrounds share in common. And I especially love to focus, often with humor, on the things that none of us want to own, right? We don't want to own these things. So for example, when we hear about changing the world, what do most of us really think about first? We think about what other people can do differently. Right? Like, we don't usually think, what can I do differently? What can other people do differently? Yeah. And, we may have really big ideas about peace. But how do we care for ourselves, right? How do we treat our shared spaces with those who have different habits? How do we engage conflict in those shared spaces? And, it's not just peace, it's also the sustainability side of the mission, right? Like, we want to see a more sustainable world, but how willing are we to change our habits as consumers? And
it's true, though, yeah.
I just think that to believe that peace begins with me, or that sustainability and a healthy environment begins with me, that means owning our power. And, thinking, well, what can someone else do to change the world? That's not owning our power, because we can't control that. And the older I get, the more I know, right? We can barely control ourselves, let alone anybody else. Yeah. And so I just think that as an educator, the way that we try to really instill that here at UWC-USA, that recognition that it starts with you, is to try to help students connect the dots between the personal, the communal, and even the larger environmental, right? So the habits that we form with respect to ourselves, that impacts our own peace of mind, our own peace of heart. And when we're at peace, we tend to contribute to a more peaceful community. And when a community is at peace, it actually has the wherewithal to focus on the larger environment, right? So they're all connected. Those three things are really integral to one another. And so that's how, at least at UWC-USA, we're really interpreting our mission and trying to bring our students to recognize what they have to offer, to own their power of words, their power of what they do. And some of the ways that they express that power is through, intentional residential programming, where we really ask them to engage peace and sustainability in the way they live and in the way they shape this community, which is really theirs, right? Our students are the majority, not the staff. So they get to shape the community. And then also giving, the time that they do to community service. The students at UWC-USA give probably 17,000 or more hours a year to the larger community. And they get to really take what they're passionate about, what they're learning, and share it with the community. And hopefully that's a lifelong recognition that no matter what community they're a part of, they have the power to make a difference. And I think that's the most important thing, because I think the conflict that you see in the US and all over the world, it's some sense of being powerless to make things better. And so we manage to make things worse.
Yeah. Hearing you say the words that you just said, and how as an educator, the goal is to try to help understand the students that we have the power to do something about it. I can tell that I have been a student of this movement, because you mentioned earlier, how did UWC start? What's the idea is to get these people, young people who want to change the world, and put them into this place and give them a healthy dose of what the world really is like. And then I remember going to UWC thinking that I was just going to change the world. And that was exactly what I wanted to do. And this was my opportunity. And then now I remember me sitting at my dorm at UF, maybe 2 or 3 years later, saying, man, I think changing the world is too big of a task for me, but I can at least change what I can do in my community, Yes. And so I have that memory. It's very, very vivid. And I think it just aligns perfectly with what you just said.
That's so good. And you are changing the world, right? So you recognize that probably starting with your own community is the place to start. But this podcast, right? It makes your community potentially the whole world. Yeah. And you're taking that step, right? You're putting yourself in a position to make a difference for others. And I think that's really something that when we bring intention to it, it really does have ripple effects.
Yeah, I think so. And I think what you said, the only thing we can do is control what we do and how we behave and how we think about things. And then the rest is up to somebody else. It's not up to us.
That is a really, really important insight, I think. And it helps us to use our energy where it can be most effective. And, trying to move a rock uphill may not be the best way to use your energy, but taking that rock and planting a garden around it, that might be a better use of your energy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I say that I can't control somebody else, but I have tried very, very hard to convince parents to let their kids go to UWC. And I failed. I have failed every time. I cannot convince a parent to, who may think that, maybe the education is great, but I'm not about to let my kid go all the way to Eswatini for 2 years and not have them next to me. So what would you say to those parents, having, that your own child went to UWC as well? What would you tell them so that we can help them get over that step?
So I was lucky as a parent. My child ended up getting assigned to Montezuma here in New Mexico. And so it was really only 60 miles up the road. And they were so gracious. They were so excited to have been chosen. So it didn't matter, even though I think they had wanted to go, I don't know, Italy or the whole world, right? And at that point, we hadn't traveled that much internationally as a family, maybe not at all at that point. And so it was something we had a little bit, but it was like they wanted to see the world, right? When Maureo came home and said, Mama, I got in. We both laughed. We laid on the bed and both laughed and cried about it. And when I went to bed that night, I really did cry myself to sleep, because I had this, even though I was like the educated one in the family, right? I'm supposed to be very excited about my child going to boarding school. I kept thinking to myself, oh my gosh, who sends their kids to boarding school? Probably only people who don't like their kids. Like, what am I doing? Am I making a mistake? But of course, I honored their dream, and my husband honored their dream, and we both just saw amazing growth and maturity and a different kind of friendship with kids from all over, and the development of a sense of community that went beyond, family and, our neighborhood to a kind of global awareness. And I just saw so much growth. And now being president at UWC-USA, I see where that growth comes from.
Yeah.
So what would I say to families and to parents, especially like me, who thought, sending my child off meant I must not like them?
Yeah.
I'd say this, depending on your child.
You got to trust them. That's for sure.
That's right. It's a sacrifice to support the dreams of our children, especially when those dreams aren't our dreams. When they take them away from home or away from your parental sense of who they are, what they need, or what they should do. It's a sacrifice. I remember I went around after Maureo brought home the letter saying, "You're in." I remember walking around asking people, "Do you think it's wrong to pray against the deepest wishes of your child? Do you think that's wrong?" But, if you support your children's dreams and you trust them, chances are very good that you're going to see growth that makes you really proud and that helps you to get past whatever fear you have or whatever sadness you have about parting with them. And that trust, we all walk into the future and we have to trust the young because the future belongs to them. It doesn't belong to those of us who have already lived most of our lives. And so when you trust your children to follow their dreams and you support that, you're going to find that, they're going to be more than okay. And they're probably still going to be buena gente, even when they've gone away, right? It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
That's what I would say.
They're going to be more buena gente.
I think that's perfectly possible. I think that's perfectly possible, right? I mean, I've seen that.
Yeah. It's scary for us as well, right? Like it's the first time that we're going to be completely away from home and parents are not going to be around to, I don't know, pick us up when we run out of gas or something like that. It's like people do. I did some questionable things when I was at UWC that maybe
I can't imagine that still happens. I can't imagine that.
But we were safe and the school was always there to help us. So I can say that.
And we absolutely are. I have to say, UWCs recognize that we're bringing students from all over the world. I mean, it is a high risk enterprise, let's be honest. And we really encourage students to take meaningful risks. I think of John Lewis, right? We encourage them to get into good trouble, right? Question the status quo in their own lives, in the school community and to work for the greater good, starting with their experience at UWC. So we know that we're putting them into a kind of pressure cooker. And we take seriously that, we want to find students who are a great match for that and who are prepared for that. And we want to support them as much as we can as they exercise their autonomy and learn to kind of stand on their own 2 feet as adults. So that's the other thing I would say to parents. We take the safety of students and the well-being of students really seriously. And that might even mean sending a student home if it's not the right environment. And I think that's something that's hard within the movement because we know what it takes to get a young person to a UWC. But I think all of us take seriously that we have to make sure that this is the best place for a student at that time in their lives. And if it's not, we all have to be brave and call that too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just mentioned this environment is kind of like a pressure cooker for young people. And for people to get into the movement, they have to go through a selection process. And throughout that selection process, we judge their ability, to the best of our abilities to withstand this environment. For those people who might be interested in applying to UWC, what attributes are looked for during the selection process, in your opinion?
So one of the amazing things about selection for UWCs, you are not applying to the school. The school isn't the only entity evaluating your application. Students either go through national committees worldwide, and those national committees, some countries might require exams, others not. Some require essays, others don't emphasize that. But most all of countries require extended interviews and group activities. And that's true as well of the global selection program, which is for students who self-identify as not needing scholarship money. And so, that both of those ways of coming to UWC really put a lot of pressure on students, including in these group interviews and opportunities to really interact and kind of test how they're going to do. So UWCs are looking for a match between students who want to make a difference in the world and campuses that bring, the challenges of the world right to the student's doorstep in these different locations. So we're looking for young people who believe that their education is about more than themselves, right? I mean, I think young people now are so pressured to be building their resumes at every moment. And UWCs aren't about resume building. They're really about wanting to make a difference. And so we're looking for candidates who want to use their education for something beyond their own success. We're looking for candidates who are curious about the world and about others. And, they absolutely can come with firm convictions, and they usually do, but they also need to be open and curious about the convictions of others. I think we're looking for people who don't just identify problems, but who already demonstrate that they're willing to work to solve problems, both on their own and with others. So there has to be something that students have already demonstrated. You can't just, say, I want to change the world. What have you done already in your own community? As you pointed out, what have you given to challenges that face you? And I think we're looking for strong students, right? Students who are prepared to live in a challenging environment, to learn through experience, to learn through doing, in addition to managing and navigating a really rigorous academic curriculum and a very diverse and pluralistic community. I think the students who do best are prepared to focus their energies on the work and on the community in the spirit of openness and hard work. And at the end, they get to join a community of over 70,000 alumni who in their own ways are trying to make a difference in the world. It's a great opportunity and one that, shouldn't be taken for granted.
Absolutely. I think it's a privilege, not just from the type of education that we get and the type of experience and maybe the opportunities that we get after going through UWC, because I wouldn't be today here standing where I'm standing if I hadn't gone to UWC, because it was thanks to Shelby Davis and his commitment to the movement that I got a scholarship to study at UF. So everything after that, it's thanks to UWC and thanks to the support of the Davis Foundation. I feel very privileged because of the education and because of the opportunities. And then one of the things that people may not know is that this kind of amazing education that we get through UWC, it is not free. It's not part of the public system. And so there is a cost associated with it. And it can be very expensive because it is a boarding school in the middle of nowhere and with very high quality education and experience. But UWC aims to make this type of experience accessible to as many people as possible. So can you talk a little bit more about the financial support that is available, especially for students in the U.S. who might be interested in applying to UWC?
Yes. I mean, if UWC weren't committed to access as well as excellence, including financial access, I wouldn't be dedicating my service to this movement. I mean, that is so important to me. At UWC-USA, about 20% of our students are from the US and come as Davis scholars, thanks to funding from Shelby Davis, as you mentioned. But the other 80% of our students are from all over the world. And of all of our students, U.S. students and international students, 80 to 85% are on some form of scholarship. Think about that. Most private educational institutions are very excited if they're approaching 50%. scholarship students. We're at over 80%, with about half of those on full scholarship. Everything from the day you step away from your home and onto that plane, we're supporting those students. So we're not a school only for those with means. U.S. citizens and legal residents who go through the U.S. selection committee, they're eligible for a merit-based Davis scholarship, and that one's $25,000 guaranteed, and up to full scholarship beyond that, depending on need. So everybody is admitted need blind, and then scholarships are given. And then after those scholarships, then we make an assessment of need and meet up to full scholarship. I mean, I'm just so dedicated to providing access. I mean, my own education was completely paid for by either philanthropy or government programs like the Pell Grant for students below a certain income. And I just know how much room, space that created for me to be able to focus on studying. And so that access is super important. And I love being associated with it. Can I give a plug for students to apply now? Because this is the time for them to apply. Our website is www.uwc-USA.org. They can get information there, and we'll be accepting applications through the end of November from U.S. students. And then for students in other countries, look on the website for the UWC National Committee in your country and apply, or look on the international website for the Global Selection Program if you don't need a scholarship, and applications are accepted there as well. And then you have a big selection process to go through, and that's an exciting piece of the whole thing.
It is. It absolutely is. And I remember my selection process, and it was a total life-changing experience by itself. But now I'm also helping with the selection process for the UWC in Venezuela.
That's so good. That's so good.
It is, because now you can see how much work goes into the selection process to begin with, and how when we design the process, we design it to be a transformative experience as well. Even if you don't get to be selected for one of the schools after the process is designed to make an impact on you and to help you realize that it starts with you, and you can go back to your community and do something about what you care about.
I love that. And it's one of the things I say to students when I address, those who are involved in selection, exactly that maybe you'll get in and maybe you won't, but this is an opportunity to really deepen your commitment to making a difference in the world.
Absolutely. And Victoria, just to finish the interview, imagine a friend of yours comes to visit you in your city and wants you to show them around, but you are at the international office doing some work in the UK, and so you won't be able to show them around. What are your top 3 recommendations for things to see or places to visit or things to do in your city?
I often joke that UWC-USA here in Montezuma, being here as president isn't like running a school, it's like running a small town. So I'm going to answer from the standpoint of Montezuma if I can.
Yeah, fantastic.
Okay. So here's what I would say you should do in Montezuma if I'm not here. First, visit the UWC-USA dining hall in the Montezuma Castle and stop to meet our students whose faces express the hopes and dreams of the whole world. Make sure to talk with them because they're awesome. 2, hike through our beautiful mountains and just take in the beauty of the forest, but also take in the tragedy of climate change. We have a massive burn scar from a huge fire this past spring, and take it all in because you can see the challenge of, the stress on ecosystems right here, right along with the beauty that we're trying to preserve. And maybe right after that, stop by the Dwan Light Sanctuary, which is this incredible building on our campus that is kind of a sacred space where you can sit and take in the beautiful light from the prisms and just rest with the silence of the building. It's such a meditative place. real spiritual, spiritual weight that all of our students use in different ways. So that would be 2. I know I sneaked in kind of 2 on that one, but that would be 2. You have to stop at the Tuan Light Sanctuary after the mountains. I think the 3rd would be visit our hot springs, where our school and the local community really found a way to break out of the town gown nonsense that can often exist, between, campuses up on the hill and the town. And we really created a partnership that makes this really special community resource a kind of local gathering space for all of us to pursue health and restoration. So I think those are the 3 things I'd say. Why don't you do that when you come to Montezuma?
Oh, I went to. I've never been to the castle. So I would love to go visit, and then I'll make sure that I'll do exactly those 3 things.
And I'll make sure that I'm here so I can do them with you.
Oh, absolutely. That'd be so great.
It would be.
Victoria, thank you so much for joining us in the podcast today.
I loved it. I loved getting to talk to you. Your smile is infectious. And I love both, you are a rocking, tough Latina, who's accomplished so much. And you bring a kind of humility to all of your questions. And to me, that is a combination that really does change the world. So I feel honored to have gotten to talk with you and share with you.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you for listening. If you want to put a face to the voices you just heard, follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LatinX Can. If you have questions or feedback, you can email us at latinxcan@gmail.com. And if you want to support our project, please leave a review. We have made it easy for you and added the links to the show notes. That's it for now. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and remember, unidos somos más.